So today I got introduced to something that's new to me. I was meeting with a young man who has started an e-mobility business here. And he was telling me about sodium-ion batteries. So instead of lithium, it's using salt, not table salt. So we're not going to be turning your Cerebos into, or your Malden into e-mobility. I'll have my batteries with molten salt, please. Smoked. It's an interesting shift to be able to move from using lithium, which is like, a tiny percentage of the Earth's crust, shifting to sodium, which is there's thousands of times more sodium available than there is lithium. But this is what I'm learning today. A sodium-ion battery has a far lower energy density than lithium does. So it's, and as the technology improves, I'm sure this will get better and better. And perhaps, and this is where I found it very interesting because the geopolitical implications are quite extraordinary. If the majority of battery production, and this would be batteries for EVs and for grid storage and for whatever usage for storing energy in some form. If there is a significant shift to sodium away from lithium, wow, and cobalt, what an incredible change in the landscape from the point of view of fairness. I'm sure that there is some excruciating labor practice within the salt sector. But given the availability of salt and the low cost of salt, it's unlikely to have anything like what's going on with lithium and cobalt, right? So this was really intriguing for me to discover. It must have come across my consciousness, but it hasn't really been anything that I've paid attention to until today. And it turns out that as part of South Africa has a white paper on EVs, and sodium-ion batteries feature in there. The CSIR has been doing quite a lot of work, particularly, there are research centers, so they've been doing a lot of the research into what it would take for South Africa to get set up as a manufacturer of sodium-ion batteries. And so, again, if I think about, I'm always thinking about decentralized systems, because everything's a pyramid scheme, ultimately. Politically, that's our structure. That's what capitalism is. Everything's a pyramid scheme. And, one of the best ways to fuck with the structures of capital is decentralization. And, suddenly when you look at the world of energy and the kind of the energy needs that we have and that we're going to continue to have, they're going to keep on growing, is if we're able to produce energy through decentralized models, then salt is a really interesting one, because it's about, we're not going to go to war over salt yet. Let's see what happens with batteries, but there's a lot of it, so we don't have to fight over it. And in fact, if it gets to the point that we're running out of it, well, all the desalination plants have salt brine as a byproduct, and we can purify it to battery grade and use it from there. There's more than enough coming out of all the desal centers around the planet. So you're not going to run out of salt, is what it seems. And, if you look at what's going on in Southwest Asia as well, part of the mosaic structure of Iran's defense makes it very hard to kind of take a series of single shots that can disable their economy. Basically, every citizen in Iran is a node. And as you know, decision-making within the governance structures in Iran is decentralized. It's a mosaic structure. So it doesn't have to go through a centralized structure for verification before decisions are made and then filtered back out again. There's decision-making autonomy in these multiple nodes. And it's interesting because it's like battery cells. If you've got battery cells that are neural, I think that's the best description that's coming to mind. There isn't a single point of failure, but capitalism has multiple central points of failure. That's because that's the nature of it. Everything goes through a central hub. There's very little authority the further you get away from the center of power. And in a decentralized structure, you've got, like in a city that's got multiple nodes, as Cape Town is interesting as it develops, because it is developing these multiple nodes. That's why, for me, the food indaba structurally is becoming very interesting every year, because we've kind of landed on our key nodes for what we do. We've got the historic city center. We've got Belleville, which is 20 miles, 12 miles, 20 kilometers approximately from Green Market Square. And then you've got Lunga, which is 12 kilometers from Green Market Square. So you've got a really interesting triangle which covers all of the realities of the city of Cape Town. In that triangle, they're covered. And as those nodes kind of develop, there's more and more autonomy, and there's more and more decentralization. It's nowhere near a hard reality at this point, but I've seen over the last 20 years those very powerful transitions. They are absolutely underway. And it's interesting for me to look at battery technology and the potential for these things to emulate these models of decentralized, literally in this case, power. So, not every country is going to become huge on rare earth manufacturing. And so suddenly salt is in the game. And that is possible. So can South Africa become a player in the battery manufacturing space? What does that mean for the free market developments that are happening with trade agreements between African countries? What does it mean when there's less geopolitical conflict around access to resources? So it's really fascinating for me. South Africa, we're having some dramatic breakthroughs in the availability and the cost. The barrier to entry to electric mobility is really coming down dramatically. And it seems that with sodium-ion batteries, we're going to see it coming down even more. The one car, and the last thing I want to leave you with here, is the Chang'an, forgive the pronunciation, I think it's Chang'an Neo, is the first production sodium-ion battery car. And typically sodium-ion apparently has a lower range than a lithium-ion, but this is a car that's gotten advertised 500 kilometers on a single charge. It's a big car. Then I discovered that Chang'an actually has a presence in South Africa, not with that car, but they have the Deepal, which is like a 1 million rand EV that can do 500 kilometers of range. Still seems crazy, a 1 million rand EV. And then the bottom of the range, the Geely E2, is a also 400 kilometer range. So that's 100 kilometers less in a car that's a third of the price. It's 339,000, call it 340,000 rand before on the road costs. 340,000 rand. It's got a 100 kilometer range. The difference in range is 100 kilometers to a car that costs 3 times the cost. So what you're paying for with the Deepal, probably a better ride quality, and definitely the interior and the styling is, but in the end, what it seems that you're paying for is you're paying for the wrapper, and the electric component, the EV component, the energy component, I have a feeling has a tendency towards zero. So is it possible that at some point, and this was the joke today, but that a human sits in a car and the human is the energy, because we've got energy efficiency so finely tuned that it needs very, very little input. So you sit in the seat and your energy activates and runs the car. Like, you get those watches that they are powered by your pulse. They don't use a battery. So that's what I've been thinking about in part today. See you later.